Philosophy in Cultural Theory by Peter Osborne. Chapter 2, Sign and Image. The distance separating cultural studies in Britain and North America from the systematic, metaphysical and existential concerns of the post-Kantian tradition is epitomised by the ontological agnosticism or methodologism consequent the former adoption of Saussurian linguistics as its model for a semiotic theory of culture. If the founding gesture of what was to become cultural studies was anthropological, it was the reception of a structuralist semiotics from France in the early 1970s, which simultaneously transformed the study of culture and established it as an intellectual field in its own right. However diverse its subsequent developments have been, cultural studies continues to be characterised theoretically by the focus on signifying practices, which that reception inaugurated, and the structuralist lineage of post-structuralist problematic which it set in place. Just as any argument regarding the value to cultural theory of the conceptual resources of the systematic and metaphysical side of the post-Kantian tradition must pass a critique of pragmatism as its implicit post-philosophical self-understanding, so this critique needs to be extended to the conception of meaning through which cultural studies constitutes its objects. This provides an opportunity to develop some themes hinted at in the previous chapter, the importance but neglect of Peirce and the affinity of Peirce and Benjamin to introduce some of new ones, such as resonances between Benjamin's and the latter Bath's writing on photography. Peirce's writings have acknowledged place in the prehistory of cultural semiotics, but only a sporadic presence with little enduring resonance within it. It is striking that even on those occasions when the greater possibilities offered by his more differentiated and philosophically complex approach to meaning have been recognised within studies, art history and musicology, such recognition has either remained unexplored or been rapidly revoked. No sooner has the insight occurred than it is isolated and undone. Indeed, it is notable that even the semiotician most influenced by Peirce, who believes that only from Peirce's point of view can many problems of contemporary text theories be satisfactorily solved, Umberto Eco fundamentally reinterprets Peirce's distinction between icon, index and symbol, reducing it to the terms of a non-referential theory of codes. At the same time, however, Eco embraces Peirce's theory of interdependence as the missing link between semiosis and physical reality as practical action. the solution to the problem of the status of meaning components that the methodologism of Saussurian semiotics ideally forecloses. Eco thus simultaneously eliminates with the referential dimension of Peirce's semiotics, while finding elsewhere within it the key to the meditation of semiotics with a pragmatist ontology. It is through a critical revision reading that the relevance of Peirce's work to the cultural theory can be brought into view. For the early Barths, like Peirce, what is ontologically distinctive about the photograph is epistemologically secondary. Namely, it is indexically, or lack of code. But the articulation between these elements is conceived in an altogether different way. Unsurprisingly, for a coded account, what Barth calls the analogical perfection of the purely indexical message without a code, or photographic message proper, is treated as the mere ground or matter on which the historical grammar of iconographic connotation is superimposed in the interpretation of any particular photograph. The purely analogical aspects of communicates no representational contact on its own. Despite Barth's use of the term analogy, the photographic image is understood to contain no discrete iconic dimension in Peirce's sense. More surprisingly, its indexical dimension is nonetheless seem to have a distinctive semiological function, namely to secure the denotative status of the image, through which the connotations carried by the codes are naturalized. But this uncoded function operates only via the coded one, the symbolic dimension, which it serves retrospectively to ground as specifically photographic. The denotative status, or naturalizing function of photographic indexicality, derives from the same source as its iconic blindness, namely its analogical perfection. The fact that in itself the photographic message proper is continuous, it lacks semiological difference. Despite the formal technical acknowledgement of its resemblance to a field of objects derived from the science of optics and chemistry, it is thus unreadable as a signifier for any particular set of objects, without the discontinuity introduced by a connotative symbolic supplement. Or to put it in another, more Kantian way, its object is indeterminate. It signifies only the photographic, meaning the purely or absolutely denotative in general. The photographic aspect of the image denotes only denotation. The photographic message proper is simply, this is real. Precisely how the photograph can convey this message, however, Barthes does not, and I would argue cannot, say outside of the appeal of no technical knowledge of the photographic process, the causal connection. Yet the development of such knowledge in any particular case presupposes the status of the photograph as a sign, that is, Peirce's firstness. Without some such presupposition, there is no reason to approach phenomenon semiologically in the first place. One way to read the functioning of firstness here is aesthetically. The historical ontology of the photographic image. This notion of the image or icon in the traditional sense long predates its modern semiotic interpretation, in which an epistemological conception of resemblance as copy predominates. It is the virtue of this older notion of the image that it combines the aesthetic, spatio-temporal concretion of an object of sight with the element of ideality inherent in ideas. This has always been its mediating function, from the understanding in ancient rhetoric as the graphic manifestation of an idea, registered in the etymological connection of idios, idea, to idyllion, image, without which, according to Aristotle, the soul never thinks. To the modernist, surrealist, and dialectical image of Pound, Carlos Williams, and Benjamin. Whether it be understood objectivistically as the Judeo-Christian tradition of the essential reality of a thing, or subjectivisticality as the proto-romantic productive imagination and ambiguous concept image of Kant schematism. An image has always been a visual presentation of reality, at once sensuously particular and ideal. In combining aesthetic particularity with ideality in this way, relative to the infinite particularity of simple intuition on the one hand, and logical determinacy of a concept which abstracts from all particularity on the other, the notion of the image shares something with the notion of the form, to be found in Kant's conception of a pure reflective judgment of taste. The latter notion being increasingly constitutive constitutive of aesthetic in the restrictive modern sense as the domain of the beautiful and the ugly, the domain of taste. However, for all its sensuousness, the notion of form remains more abstract than the image, since it is essentially subjective and excludes all reference to a representational function. Hence, its suitability to the late optically reductive version of Greenberg's formalist modernism is inherent in representational function. The notion of the image exceeds the domain of Kantian aesthetic, without, however, sacrificing presence to meaning in the manner of Saussurian or code-based semiotics. In particular, its theological history of ontological surrogacy, a carrier of the divine, offers a conceptual model for the unification of iconicity with indexicality. Krakauer associated this disorder of the detritus of nature in photography with the suspension of every habitual relationship among the elements of nature. In contrast, he put his hopes in the game that film plays with the pieces of disjointed nature to construct images of an alternative organisation of things. There can be few more powerful critiques of photography as a cultural form. However, it relies in part upon a backwards-looking contrast with positive metaphysical concepts of nature, memory, art and history, which have their social basis, or at least need rethinking under the conditions of modernity. If they are to retain a critical purchase, they will have to be recovered, transformed from reflection on the structures of contemporary practice, as indeed Krakauer attempted to some extent elsewhere in his writings. Benjamin and the late Barth undertook a similar task with regards to the photograph itself. They did not reject Krakauer's analysis, so much as to complement it, dialectically by focusing upon other contrasting aspects of the experience of the photograph. In Rhetoric of the Image, 1964, Barth had already identified the truly unprecedented type of consciousness associated with anthropological revolution of the photograph as stemming from an ideological conjunction between the here-now and the here-then. But he had classified its relations to the presence as unreal, arguing that the photograph is in no way a presence. In Camera Lucida, on the other hand, the photograph appears as a certificate of presence, authentication itself. To ask whether a photograph is an analogical or coded is not a good means of analysis. Bathner argues the important thing is that the photograph possesses an evidential force that its testimony bears not on the object but on time. What is authenticated here is contingency itself. Photography offers an immobilized experience of contingency, which is of profound metaphysical relevance and existential force. The unheard of identification of reality that has been with the truth, there she is. That crazy point where the affect, love, compassion, grief, enthusiasm, desire is a guarantee of being. Meaning and historical experience. Eco reinterpreted Peirce's notion of icon and index within the terms of non-referential theory of codes, but he nonetheless retained elements of Peirce's pragmatism in two ways. One, in his use of Peirce's theory for inference to account for the ways in which codes are established for indices, and two, in his adoption of Peirce's understanding of habit as the final logical interpretant of an intellectual sign. In each case, semiotics appears as part of a broader theory of experience. At the same time, however, the concept of experience is naturalized in such a way as to abstract from its cultural historical forms and dynamics. Eco explains the process by which imprints a particular iconic type of index, including the photograph, come to be conventionally coded as follows. Imprints, like any other recognition procedure, are conventionally coded, but the code is not established by an arbitrary social decision, but is instead motivated by previous experiences. The correlation between a given form and a given context has been mediated by a series of mentions, inference based on uncoded circumstances, metasemiotic statements. Since the experience of an event was constantly associated with a given imprinted form, the correlation first proposed as a result of an interference was then posited. The formalization of Eco's conventionalism is clear. What makes a correlation conventional, and thus a possible sign function, is the mere fact of its positioning as a rule. The general claim that code provides the rules that generate sign functions thus turns to be misleading. Rather, in the case of these indices, the rules that generate sign functions are provided by, proposed as the inferential results of experience, including, most importantly, the experience of experimental sciences. predicate is to predict. This is the relation to the absolute object at the limit of infinite semiosis that is established by final logical interpretations. Semiosis only remains endless outside of a practical orientation to the world, such as the intellectualism of deconstruction. However, our practical relation to the world is experimental and hence fallible. The infinite semiosis of logical interpretants thus stands as a permanent background resource for new practical relations to be tested in the world. Furthermore, this threefold dynamic of interpretive, pragmatic, and speculative or negative ontological forms is a constitutive of the subject as it is of the object of knowledge. The absolute object will have to be an absolute subject as well. This is the cultural dimension. With its combination of speculative metaphysical realism and practical experimentation, this model bears a close resemblance to Benjamin's account of the joint role of perception and the use of appropriation of cultural forms, mastering the task of facing the human apparatus of perception gradually by habit. By collective testing and communication of results, Benjamin's adherence to a speculative metaphysical realism of the absolute object, history, aligns the cultural history with the ontological structure of Peirce's theory of interpretants, providing the level of meditation that is needed to turn semiotics into a logic of culture. The aspiration of cultural studies since 1970. For the history of forms that Barthes designated, the essential aim of semiological research is not to be found at the level of signifying systems, but more fundamentally at that of the history of technologies of image production or signifying media. Furthermore, for Benjamin, while all images are historical indices, the historical character of the present is such that the historical index of the images not only says that they belong to a particular time, it says above all that they attain to legibility only at a particular time, and indeed this ascending to legibility constitutes a specific critical point in the movement of their interior. Every present day is determined by the images that are synchronic with it. Each now is the now of a particular recognizability. Benjamin's understanding of historical experience as a dialectical relationship between now and then, internal to the interpretation of images, metonymically figuring history as a whole, gives to the hermeneutics of the final interpretant an immediately speculative and hence critical turn. Deleuze maps Peirce's semiotic trichotomy of icon, index and symbol onto a conception of the social as the coding or inscription of desire, an imminent process of the territorializing and deterritorializing and re-territorializing of desire by various desiring machines. For Deleuze, everything is desiring production. It is the central reality of man and nature. Such production takes the form of a flow that is constantly interrupted, drained off into partial objects and reinstituted. Every object presupposes the continuity of a flow, every flow the fragmentation of the objects. Machines essentially all organized and organising structures, natural or social, cut into these flows by coding them in various ways. We are then We are thus presented with an internally differentiated, monist, ontological, or libidinal economy, in which what is at once pure multiplicity, an affirmation that is irreducible to any sort of unity, and a field of energy ordered into a structured but unstable network of signifying chains. Each aspect relies upon each other, since interruption is the condition of the renewal of flow of desire. Signs produce desire, which in turn provides the material for the always partial, segmentary investments that define distinct strata and forms of life. Movement of territorialization quantify the assemblages within different strata. Assemblages are at once mechanic, assemblages of bodies, of actions and passions, and enunciative, collective assemblages of enunciation, of acts of statements, of incorporeal transformations attributed to bodies. The specificity of the capitalist formation of sovereignty within this ontological is taken to be that the great axiomatic has replaced the territorial codes and the despotic overcoding that characterized the preceding formations, and a molar gregarious aggregate has formed whose mode of subjugation has no equal. An unprecedented decoding and deterritorialization which institutes a combination as a system of differential relations begin between the decoded and the deterritorialized flows in such a way that social inscription and repression no longer need to bear directly upon bodies and persons, but on the contrary precede them. However, the great mutant flow of capital performs an equivalent re-territorialization when covered into a reflux of means of payment or property. The capital money socius thus oscillates between the poles of two very different forms of desire. Within this framework, indices, icons and symbols are distinguished by territorially deterritorialization relations, not signifier or signified relations. Indices are territorial signs or territorial states of things constituting the designatable. Icons are operations of re-territorialization constituting the significable, and symbols pertain to relative or negative deterritorialization in a constant movement of referral from sign to sign. Chapter 3. Modernism as Translation. It is the theoretical virtue of comparative cultural study that it forces us to rethink the abstract opposition of philosophical to empirical concepts by focusing on the conceptual semantics and socio-political dynamics of processes of generalization of particular terms. What is, could be, or should be, the status of the most general concepts of a genuinely transitional culture theory? And what is the relationship of their forms to universality, other philosophical and empirical conceptual forms? To what extent do the theoretical prehistory and process of formation of such concepts impinge upon their use in the present? In particular, is there any way in which such concepts can avoid the fate of becoming little more than intellectual markers or even symbolic enhancers of global processes or cultural dominion and hegemony? Indeed, can or should there be general concepts of sufficient generality to embrace the full geopolitical range of a genuinely transitional cultural theory at all? Alternatively, can there be a transnational cultural theory without them? See in particular Peter Wallen, The Semiology of Cinema, in his Science and Meaning of the Cinema, 1969, 4th edition, British Film Institute, London, 1998, pages 79 to 106, and the conclusion added to the 2nd edition, 1972, pages 107 to 18, David Osman Smith, The Iconic Process in the Musical Communications, verse 3, 1972, and Formal Iconism in Music, verse 5, 1973, Teresa de Lourdes, Imagining and Semiotics and Experience in her Alice Doesn't Feminism Semiotic Cinema, Indiana University Press, Bloomington, 1982, pages 37 to 69 and 158 to 186, and The Rhetoric of Violence, Consideration on Representation and Gender in her Technologies of Gender, Essays in Theory, Film and Fiction, Macmillan Basingstoke, 1987, pages 31 to 50, Margaret Iverson, Saussure versus Peirce, Model of Semiotics in Visual Art, in A. L. Rees and F. Borizio, The New Art History, Camden Press, 1986, pages 82 to 93. The inspirations behind these successes to Peirce were Roman Jacobson, Umberto Eco, and Meyer Shapiro, respectively. For a critique of Wallen's collapse back to Saussureanism, already evident in the 1972 conclusions to Signs and Meaning in the Cinema, see D. N. Roderick, The Crisis of Political Modernism, Criticism and Ideology in Contemporary Film, 1988, second edition, University of California Press, Berkeley, 1994, chapters 2 and 6. Like others interested in the articulation of semiotics with psychoanalysis, Woolen came to associate the icon Lankian imagery, therefore performing a psychoanalytical reduction of this non-linguistic aspect that removed it from the context of Peirce's pragmatism. Psychoanalysis has also exhibited in De Laurentiis a more consistent Peircean, from further developing the framework sketched into her semiotics and experience. What follows below is a meditated return to the perspective opened up in that essay.